All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. Welcome to Punishing Poverty. We have 10 takeaways here with two former mayors of ours in Culver City, Meghan Sahli-Wells and Alex Fisch joining me. We are here to discuss some really important updates on the fight for fair housing and housing for all people in our city. And just to catch our audience up to speed, thank you for joining us, by the way. Just to catch our audience up to speed, we are just one day or 2 days after a really pivotal council meeting where some decisions were made to essentially ratify an anti-camping ordinance that spans the entire city. And the decision to ratify hasn't actually happened yet, but it's going to come back to the council at a future meeting. But the purpose of this of this live stream, and thanks again for being here, is to really recap what's happened over the past few weeks and the major shift that we're seeing in housing policy and homelessness policy from the previous council, where former Mayor Fisch was a member, to where we are now. So before we get into, I guess, what happened last night, let's set the scene on the discussion that happened right before Christmas. We had a new council elected, and they put on the schedule a special discussion on December 21st related to an anti-camping ordinance and establishing an emergency, declaring a state of emergency with regard to homelessness, and also safe camping. So there was a lot going on in that discussion. How did we get here? Do you want to add any insight into that moment, the cruelty before Christmas? And I'll start with former Mayor Sahli-Wells.
Thanks, Bubba. Thanks for moderating this, and thanks for folks who are joining this. Well, I mean, it's rare to hold an emergency meeting, but I, in my 2 terms in office, had never seen an emergency meeting held the week of Christmas that promoted such cruelty. And what the current new conservative council majority did and hold it during this meeting was to try to put an anti-camping ordinance into law in Culver City. It's based on Santa Monica or Beverly Hills model, and it wasn't about solving homelessness, it was about punishing homelessness. And so it's really surprising to see this extreme measure of this urgent meeting in order to inflict harm. And so that in itself, that very first act in itself, I think told us a lot about the tone and the tenor and the lengths that this council is willing to go in order to harm people.
And it was the meeting was requested literally in the final minutes of the very first meeting where the new council was inducted and the old council was removed, right, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first priority of this council, not homelessness, but specifically this ordinance. Let's be very clear, because there's a lot of, we'll get to it, but there's a lot of recharacterizing, a lot of revisionist history going on, because what was agendized, and I should have pulled a clip, was specifically an ordinance based on Santa Monica. Meghan said it, but it was not an emergency declaration on homelessness. It was not services. It was not any of the things that we had already had in process through prior city councils, which are 95% of what folks talk about as they defend making the first 10 hours of council business be making it illegal to have anything other than a blanket and a pillow, even if it's raining. That's what they agendized. That's specifically what they agendized.
And with the let's talk about some like more before we get into the meat and potatoes of the anti-camping ordinance, which I know we have a lot to talk on there. I want to
Point of
sort of
order.
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, quickly. I know it's hard to change, but literally one of the commenters spoke on this on Monday. But camping is defined by definition as a recreational activity, as one of the council members kind of related his own experiences. These folks are not camping. This is not a recreational activity. It's poverty that's more extreme than slums I saw in India, where people are allowed to shelter themselves. It's really anti-shelter, anti-living.
Yeah, that's a really good. That's a much better way of putting it and more accurate to what it actually is. So before we get to the anti-poverty ordinance and the anti-living ordinance, when we talk about the state of emergency that was declared and the renewed or the extra focus on safe camping or the expedited, their emphasis on safe camping, I think people who are probably of good faith and might not be paying attention as much are probably wondering, why haven't we done safe camping yet? Why haven't we done and how is this council, regardless of their views on criminalization, how are they making progress on this issue when the previous council we didn't do that yet? We were focusing on other things, right? So help us understand what the priorities were in that previous council, and address some of those concerns before we get into the enforcement part. I think would be helpful.
I kind of was. This is more on me than Meghan, so I'm sorry to go twice, but I'll be quiet. But
Yeah.
I think Mayor Vera brings up often the pallet housing thing, but the thing is, we had this Project Home Key priority, and getting real assets for the city, getting real doors that people can lock and sleep safely in. I'm not going to express any views on pallet shelter. There's debates. I probably would support it, but we had a bird in the hand. We had this hotel project to convert these real rooms, locking doors and flushing toilets, a lot more dignity. So we've seen that it's taken a long time to go from idea to grant and a lot of staff time to actually opening. It's not open yet. It was supposed to be open in November. And the priority, we wanted to prioritize staff's attention, not distract them with drafting ordinances and having 10-hour meetings that people say are not actually going to have any consequence or enforcement.
Yeah. So sorry, former Mayor Meghan, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, you have to think about the scarcity of resources, because it's a real thing. And so if staff is doing one thing, that means that it's taking away from something else. It's taking time, it's taking money, and just the capacity is surprisingly little. And a lot of these projects, I mean, we were talking about safe camping, about safe parking, a lot of these projects years ago. I mean, it's been 6-7 years. And ironically, one of the current conservative council members has voted against like Project Home Key and a lot of these long-term solutions, which they're now kind of like, tooting the horn of, but actually didn't resource or even support in the past. And then there's, when you are in charge of a city budget and city staff, you have to have a head for numbers, right? Like you have to be thinking about how are you going to maximize the resources for the best quality services that you can possibly do. And along with the kind of last minute, at the time, pallet shelter idea, there was also more like modular structures that were also on the table. Those are those can be very rapidly deployed, and they last longer and they look better. I think one of the problems with the pallet shelter idea was that, there have been a lot of problems with them in other communities. They're smaller than a jail cell. And again, you want to make sure that you're doing things that are going to work for the human beings who are going to live in them. And it just takes so long to have these projects move forward. But what we've seen here, rather than amplifying that and making sure that we resource it and we prioritize it and fast track it, we're wasting time in a criminalization conversation.
I think that's really
and I know we
important.
need to get moving. Oh,
yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry. Well, one quick comment. It's, people's actions reflect their priorities. And I'm a little concerned, if we were talking about doing safe camping right, so it's not a jail, and my concern is that if we're starting with enforcement, that this essentially would be an open air prison. And, that's why advocacy is going to be so important. People need to shine a spotlight so that, that people know that the public is not going to stand for creating an open air prison.
Yeah. And I want to also, give credit where it's due, that a lot of folks are thinking of homelessness in terms of like, what are we doing right, for the people who are on the ground, when the previous council has done a ton to actually alleviate the root causes of homelessness, our housing market. I mean, we're talking about a housing crisis created by a lack of options, a lack of housing supply, where the previous council was able to legalize, micro unit apartments, and was able to abolish parking, mandates that made for very expensive units, and even took up a really, long process and difficult process of creating more housing units throughout the city and allowing for more housing units in our zoning throughout the city, which created, a ton of pushback. But the same people that were against something that is proven to alleviate our housing supply issues are now promoting the criminalization of our unhoused population that's a result of that. So I think a lot of people who are, who have those doubts and those questions, they need to understand the level of effort that was put into actually creating more housing in our city and creating a more fair market. That's not everything, but it's certainly a huge step forward. But
Bubba, if I can, apologies for interrupting, but I just want to add to your excellent list, rent control. Rent control was foundational, and this is one of the root causes of homelessness, and one of the reasons why LA County and the state of California and indeed the nation keep struggling with it, which is, more people are falling into homelessness than are coming out, and those are the results of an insane and unprotective rental market and runaway evictions, which thankfully, even in my time, we were able to pass with great opposition, as you said, Bubba, from some of the key people who are the champions of anti-camping.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I also appreciated you talking about the limitations of staff. I'm on the Committee on Housing and Homelessness for the city, and we have 3 staff members who are really involved in the housing options and opportunities for unhoused folks. 3 that I know of, and we have our outreach team too, which is separate, which is St. Joseph Center. But we have such a small amount of staff members that are focused on creating those housing opportunities for those people. So for people to say, well, how come all of this isn't done, I think is unfair. But I want to take it now to our anti-camping ordinance, because this is really what the new council is pushing, that is sort of extraordinary, right? Like Alex said, it was supposed to be modeled after Santa Monica. This goes, to my knowledge, even further in criminalizing being unhoused in the entire city, and with the exception of if you have no belongings except for a blanket and a pillow, but anything else that you could possibly have with you. I think, Megan, you pointed out medical documents, mobility devices, accessibility devices, clothing, any belongings, shelter in the dead of winter. It's illegal to be there. So I guess my question and I'll ask Alex this, is how unusual is this in the region, and what other cities and areas are taking a different approach?
I'll say two things on this. One is that someone I spoke to about this our specific ordinance asked me if the intention of the majority was to get to the Supreme Court to try and invalidate Martin v. Boise, sort of like Ken Paxton of the Attorney General of Texas. Are they trying to are they trying to make Culver City the poster child for saying it's okay to push the boundaries on allowing people, the poorest of the poor, to exist in public? So, I mean, that sort of gives you a sense of what this ordinance is. And, I have not checked line by line. Councilmember Erickson represents that it's the same as Santa Monica and Beverly Hills. I know Santa Monica has a similar ordinance, but has way more services, including unarmed outreach, and they have a shelter up and running. And homelessness is not gone in Santa Monica if you've ever been there. So that's what they've represented. I think that's probably true. I do think that all three cities are sort of cruising for civil rights litigation, because it's an open secret that Beverly Hills has a standing move along policy. They sent them to West Hollywood, and eventually some city or civil rights group is going to say this is ridiculous, because when you have a small city where it's this inconvenient to live, and you're going to have this much interaction with enforcement, even if they say that there's no consequence, they didn't eliminate the fines or anything. And of course, fines complicate your life of being poor. When you have that much contact, of course, you're going to move out of the city. And that, I think, is actually the unstated intent. It's what Beverly Hills has done successfully. And it's, I think even City of LA may object at some point when you've got a situation like we used to have, where one side of Venice has nobody, and the other side is, a place where people live. And I just say that, the only other thing about this is that this approach of providing just enough serviceable, adequate, just enough shelter to be able to enforce what is, fundamentally, it's coercive. It's a coercive ordinance. It ignores that homelessness is not a stock of people. It is a flow of people. Because as soon as you get people into shelter, they then need permanent housing, or they fall back into homelessness. And meanwhile, once you move people into the pipeline towards permanent housing, more people, until we deal with the rent increases, which is the sole driver of homelessness, according to a pretty thorough study that's in a book called "Housing is a Homelessness Problem." Homelessness is a housing problem. Until you address that problem, you're going to have more people falling into homelessness than getting housed. So, great theater, but I'm not sure it's a solution.
Yeah, and what do we do, Megan, about, we have staff saying we don't perform sweeps. We have people from, all over the city saying this isn't how Culver City does things. We're going to do things compassionately. But then we have what's actually written in the text of the law. So depending on who staff is, the enforcement mechanism, the ability to enforce is still there. So are these sweeps and then, or are they not? And can you help people understand why it's so problematic to be sweeping now, considering the options we have for people?
Yeah. Oof. Kinder, gentler sweeping, right? It's like, I mean, listen, I've worked with, I've worked with Culver City staff for, for many years. I have tremendous respect for them. But they take direction from the council, and you can say all you want. But the thing that's binding is the written law. And so what we keep hearing over and over is like, oh, providing services, oh, bringing people indoors. But the only thing that's written down is make them leave, take away their shelter, take away their tent, take away all their personal belongings. And the only thing that they have the right to have is the cold, hard ground, and maybe a pillow, and maybe a blanket, or maybe a sleeping bag, because because the law forces them, the law of the land forces them to do that. So this is, you can see this. So this is what the written word is that you can enforce, as opposed to, the spin, that's this kindness spin that's happening. And it says, very clearly, no person shall camp in a prohibited place. No person shall leave or store personal property or camp facilities in a prohibited place. And what are those prohibited places? Everywhere in the city. There is no place you can be in the city to do this
Private
safely.
property. Private property is not prohibited. So great. People that don't have that. Yeah.
Right.
Everything else. Yeah.
So any public right of way, any place where a person, does or could go is illegal to exist in. And so, let's be clear. All of us want to solve this problem, I think. The goal here isn't for a single second to say, like, yes, everybody should just be on the street all the time. No. What we should have are all the services, the proven and means tested ways of getting people connected to services and into stable housing and whatever services that they need to get back up on their feet. But this, starting with this ordinance is starting with the erasure of human beings. And it is nothing written here says that they are providing services. And that is why this is, so evil.
And it's proven by what happened at the meeting. There's ironclad proof because Councilmember Puza tried to submit a substitute motion prioritizing actual solutions, the solutions that everyone talks about. He tried to make a motion on that, and the city attorney said, "That's not what you agendized. You agendized this ordinance that coerces people out of shelter." So, I mean, this is what's infuriating unhoused folks that have spoken up and people who are advocating for them, that there's a big disconnect between the rhetoric and what is actually happening. And I think the one that really, really irks people is to say that this is about compassion and you can't just leave people out in the street. And then you take away the tent that keeps them 5 to 15 degrees warmer, as the former head of the Los Angeles Homeless Initiative testified last night, that this ordinance will kill people. Mm-hmm. And he's right.
Yeah. And that is backed up by, even data from LA City. LASA released their numbers that this CARE program, which was essentially, their sweeping program where they went in, swept an area, and then tried to connect those people to housing services. It was 30,000 people that were put into that program and swept essentially. 90% of them they lost contact with. This is in the LA Mag article about the LASA study. 90% of them they lost contact with, and only 1% of them they were able to move into permanent housing options. So it's pretty clear, from the data, like you said, Alex, like sweeps are particularly harmful, and they don't do anything to solve the problem, especially when we don't have the solutions up and running. I think there's a disconnect where people are seeing the outpouring of compassion as almost like as not wanting a solution, like you said, like we're uninterested in solutions, when really it's the fact that we want the solutions to actually be in place. The solutions are not in place. So I think that seems to be quite a bit of disconnect in how we're talking about this. We don't have safe parking. We don't have any safe camping. We have no permanent supportive housing yet. Project Home Key's been delayed from November to March. So yeah, and any thoughts on that way that people are thinking about it, that these solutions are not ready yet, and yet we're pursuing the enforcement of something where they don't have anywhere else to go. And I still haven't heard anyone articulate where they're going to be placed. And last night, I don't know if they have the clip, but Vice Mayor McMorrin even asked them, how many housing units did we produce last year? How many shelter beds are available tonight? And they didn't have an answer. How can we pursue this policy when those answers aren't readily available?
It's why we're going to get sued. I mean, San Francisco. So Morton v. Boise, I didn't have to, had work today, and I'm not in council anymore, so I don't do my homework as closely. But so I didn't refresh my recollection on these cases. But Martin v. Boise basically just said you can't hold someone criminally liable if you don't have sufficient shelter bed. That's about it. People said, oh, you can cite them still, and all you can, still hassle them. And then a case recently out of Oregon went to the Ninth Circuit and said, you have to at least let people have bedding and a pillow. That's directly where this came from. Santa Monica's change to this ordinance was in the last month because their prior ordinance was unconstitutional. And I don't know. I took the oath of office 6 times at the state, federal, and local level. It never was a big deal to me because the Constitution is the lowest bar imaginable for an elected official to clear. Santa Monica's ordinance was unconstitutional. I would be ashamed of myself if I signed or voted on an ordinance that was unconstitutional. But this is intentionally close, as close to the line as possible. Finally, San Francisco just was subjected to a preliminary injunction saying that they can't break up encampments because they don't have enough shelter beds. And the actual experience on the ground, Meghan talked about the official policy versus staff's, good work. But if council says it's, this is the law, that's the law. But also on the ground, San Francisco's program, the district court judge and the parties stipulated, they didn't argue, they didn't hold this, but they just said, let's assume that, there's not enough shelter beds, but your program would be constitutional if it's actually carried out correctly. When they actually had testimony of the people experiencing the program, and you compared it to the testimony that San Francisco was able to submit about how they operated the program, it was also deemed unconstitutional. So we're not even anywhere near that level. We're not at Santa Monica's level of services. And I really have, that is why I think we're in the crosshairs.
It's like the Trump administration with family separation. Tearing children away from their families didn't solve immigration, right? And taking away somebody's tent is not going to solve homelessness.
And the other part, yeah, I agree. And if people were speaking what's on there, at least one council member, I think if that person spoke his mind, he would also use a reference to Mitt Romney's self-deportation. I think it was Mitt Romney. That the goal, I mentioned this earlier, but I do think that the goal is for to send a message: when the sun's down, you best get out of this town.
Yeah, that's, per our history, that's pretty powerful that we're really back in that place, just in a different form. We have a video from last night's meeting that we want to play.
People in housing.
Here we go.
We will let people continue live in conditions that I don't think is humane. If we can do anything to improve their situation while housing is getting produced, found, whatever, I feel that we have actually improved their situation. And that is what this whole thing is about, is if you have listened, there is a combination of a lot of things. So we have the ordinance, which is enforcement, and I think my colleague, Mr. Ryan, eloquently described how this is going to work. And I agree with him that, and I know staff is there also, is that the whole purpose is to have the room key up, have safe parking up, and maybe we even will have something else going. And then we have our blocks of motel rooms that we will contract.
It seems that this council is trying to, give the message that they are interested in solutions. They're just also pursuing the enforcement before we've even started implementing any of those solutions. And in some cases, they're actively against a lot of the solutions that would actually help for a more affordable housing market too. But yeah, any reactions to that video?
I mean, it's exactly backwards, right? you make the problem worse before you solve it. And providing these services is, the trust relationships have to be built. There's so much, people people experiencing homelessness so often will tell you just horror stories of being in shelters, or being promised services and then never getting them, or getting their possessions uh, taken away in a sweep. You can call it a cleanup, you can call it whatever you want, but a sweep is a sweep. I mean, it means, get out. We're going to take everything down. And
By the way,
you see an example from the city, that was posted, I think maybe on the senior center just recently.
and one thing you may have alluded to there is unhoused folks that may meet someone or have a connection to somebody who knows someone in the city end up, maybe finding the city ends up finding a motel room for them, or a council member, if alerted to a specific situation, is able to find a motel room. This happened to me. I was able to find shelter for somebody that it lives in my neighborhood who's unhoused, because they wanted shelter, and I knew city staff, and I called them, and they were able to get a motel. But that's no equitable. That's not a system. That's happenstance. That's chance. That's luck, and we don't have any system. We have St. Joseph's Outreach, which are amazing. That team is amazing. We have Upward Bound House, which takes care of some families here. We have no permanent supportive housing yet for any unhoused individuals. So you're SOL if you don't have a connection to somebody who knows someone to get you a motel temporarily. And when that motel voucher is expired, you're back on the street again. Sorry, Alex, I saw you jumping into.
That's not. It's just there's a dissertation that someone completed in the last year or two that really gets into the experience on the street of existing outreach. And this is not a knock on outreach. It's just that we do not fund any of this stuff anywhere in California enough, because that is how the system works. The outcomes are fairly random. It's happenstance. It's who you know. It's if you are not too smelly. It's if people deem you a worthy poor person. It's a feature of the system, unfortunately.
Yeah, let's talk about a different vision of this system. This ordinance, we touched on it. One of the most frustrating things about the ordinance that people might not realize is it also constrains our solutions. It literally outlines that safe camping sites cannot be established in city parks or in their adjacent parking lots. And city parks are a long list of facilities are incorporated in city parks, from senior center to Vets Park. There's so many areas that is designated as a city park. So not only does this ordinance amplify the enforcement, but it constrains possible solutions, which makes it harder for a new council to implement those solutions. And so let's talk about some of the solutions and what a care first approach or a housing first approach might look like. Tonight is actually the Culver City homeless count. So we're going to go out in teams. It's an internal count, so no volunteers. We're going to go out in teams. I'm one of them. And we're going to, and there are some issues with the homeless count, right? It's not 100% accurate, but it's what we have right now to assess how things are going. And we saw a huge spike in the 2022 count. So we're going to go out, we're going to understand the extent of the increase from 2021 to 2022 very soon. So how do you both envision a system that works differently than the one being proposed by council today? And I'll start with Meghan.
Yeah, I mean, the previous council has really been trying to get up and running the mobile crisis response team. That just keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed. Making sure that you have the right people intervening when there's a crisis situation is really key. I mean, care first means that you're really dealing with the problem, the key issues, right? You're building the housing. You are building social housing. And I believe tonight there's a planning meeting, hopefully where we'll move forward with a really exciting affordable housing on the Culver Palms church site. The Project Home Key that Alex and his colleagues worked so hard to get forward, and also has been delayed. Like, so there are all these other things that need to be better resourced and better prioritized. But yet again, here we are regressing, and I think if you step back and think about care first, what you're looking at is the system, right? The system is what is causing the homeless crisis. It is not the individuals who are involved. You can tell by the sheer number of people who are experiencing this that it is a fault on our part, systemic underserving of key communities that is at fault, and that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and Alex, do you want to add to that, especially the mobile crisis work team
Absolutely.
you've created?
I'll try to weave it in, because when I started, my first appointed position with the city was on the committee on homelessness as well. We had nothing. We had zero. The committee had been there for I think a decade, and we had very little. Not to knock staff; they were doing the best they could, mostly administering rental assistance program and Section 8 program, and doing what they could with little resources. This was right as the Los Angeles homelessness initiative came out, and so we started to attack what we could do in that plan locally, which resulted in increased outreach. It resulted in the very system of tracking contacts that allowed for the data that everybody cited last night, and allows us to create the by name list, allows us to avoid losing people to the extent we can. It resulted in the Project Home Key work, which has brought $30 million at least into the city, plus operating money from the county. It resulted in, so much more. We switched over half of our Section 8 vouchers to rehouse homeless people. And instead of just on the list to leapfrog people who are experiencing street homelessness, a million other things that I can't remember, but because it's so much. But one of the key things was mobile crisis intervention. The idea is that you'd have this third public safety resource, which is reflected in the creation of the Department on Housing and Human Services. Eventually, we'll have 40 hours a week, and hopefully 24/7. We'll have people who are experts in dealing with mental health crisis, in dealing with homelessness outreach, and combining like a bouncer with a caseworker, basically someone who's able to go out and interact in a way that's not that they feel comfortable, but is not as threatening. Because a person in uniform can be threatening to some people who've had bad experiences and are living in trauma with. If you've talked to anyone who's lived through street homelessness, there's PTSD is ubiquitous because horrible things happen very quickly. But so that's all the stuff we did. And the mobile crisis is a really, I think an important feature, just because PD can be counterproductive. Those contacts can actually be criminogenic. They can cause antisocial behavior.
If you've ever been in the grocery store or in a park and you have a parent hit a kid and say, "Hey, don't hit your brother," like that's what the police response is, right? You're actually teaching them the opposite of what you're preaching, and this this punitive way of approaching human beings is fundamentally flawed. And our approach, that's why it's care first, right? It's not take away your stuff first. Right?
And what is really ironic is a lot of folks who are pushing the enforcement are doing so under the guise of, well, a lot of people are service resistant. You hear this idea of the service resistant unhoused person idea a lot. And to the extent that it might be a hyperbole, it's also ironic because you're creating a harmful system. You're creating a system that actively harms people, and then wondering why they would be resistant to services. It the answer is in the question that in and of itself, you're creating something that's actively harmful. I also want to transition to, oh, go ahead.
Well, just really quickly, what I worry about is that it reflects that underlying conflation of crime and poverty. Also, that the idea that we need police to go and enforce because there's something inherently criminal about being so poor that you can only sleep in a cardboard box. And we hear that with I don't think I'd ever heard the word masturbate in city council chambers before, but it's come up a lot lately. And that is not a justification. The fact that something happened that, I think is awful too. But, it's not a reason for collective punishment, because living on the streets is not a crime. Shouldn't be. Yeah. It is in Culver City.
Yeah. Seeing something that distresses you is not an experience that has to warrant a call to the police. In life, we see things that are distressing that aren't illegal. That's just part of existence.
I grew up in Camarillo, and I saw plenty of distressing stuff from housed people, and
yeah.
And I grew up in Culver City, and as a child walking up my street, had people masturbating, and they were housed. Most likely, it is. Yeah, it's not a. It's. Yeah,
it's not confined to one community, and that's another huge myth. Where we know unhoused folks are far more often the victims of crime. Really
quickly, I'm sorry. I know we got to get to the next thing, but the first time I ever saw a lewd act in public, I was in the dorms at Berkeley. I was on the first floor. I was looking down at the street, and somebody pulled up in a BMW and was going to town on himself. So, BMW drivers can commit lewd acts as well.
Yeah. And that's what we really should be talking about. So we have a video that we're going to show it. In these conversations,
also cards, my cash
including
cards.
This one. Frankly, we don't hear from the people actually impacted, and we thankfully got to hear from a lot of them on Monday night. So here's a video that a volunteer, Sebastian, put together when he went and interviewed people experiencing homelessness.
We're all supposed to love each other, and you don't want to kick a person down even harder than they already are.
During sweeps, currently, like right now, I lost my ID, I lost credit cards, my cash card. It's hard to hold on to those things first and foremost on the street, and to lose them just sets you back pretty bad, actually.
Right now, I'm living in a tent. That's not how I came up in this world. I had a home and 2 parents that love me and 4 siblings that love me.
Everybody has their own issues. Like, people have mental problems, people just have breaks from life, people lose jobs. And, anybody can become homeless.
Some homeless people, dude, some of the best people I ever met in my life. I don't tell them a lot, but just try to hold on to them as much as I can. I love them very much.
Just sweep away people's lives, whatever they have of a life. But you see, it's not a solution. That's not a solution. It's wrong.
So I want to highlight, on Monday, we showed up at City Council. There was a rally organized by Culver City for More Homes, Culver City Action Network, Palms Unhoused Mutual Aid, some organizations ranging from top level policy minded organizations down to harm reduction organizations that are really on the ground with people. And we showed up in pretty good numbers and yelled at City Council at council chambers and try to drive home that point. And we brought in Palms Unhoused Mutual Aid was great about bringing people who are actually experiencing the issue into council chambers and talking to council about what it's like and what kind of harms, like you just heard in that video, losing your financial cards, your information, your bank card, your bicycle, your pets, like they're putting them in a trash can. I mean, this is no joke. Like in Culver City, that's the proposal, is a locked trash can, and just the dignity of that and what that does to a person, like we've all been talking about, it's very harmful. So what, in terms of action, what actions can we do from this point forward? I know this is coming back to the council. Can Meghan, do you want to give us any hints about what advocates where we can apply pressure, how you think we should be continuing the fight right now?
Yeah, I really want to honor and give a huge shout out to Vice Mayor Yasmin Imani McMorrin and Councilmember Freddie Puza. They are in the progressive minority right now of the council. They came to the rally. They consistently speak up and really eloquently for the care first approach. And despite the spin that's happening on the other side, on the conservative side, where they're saying that, these types of approaches are really good for the houseless, the people experiencing homelessness that showed up on Monday night and who have spoken out and were in that wonderful testimony video that Sebastian Hernandez kindly shared with us. When you hear from them, they are not advocating for you to take their tent away, right? And so supporting the council members who are really sticking up for what's right and dignified, proven solutions to solve this problem instead of punishing people is going to be really important. So you can follow Yasmin Imani McMorrin, our vice mayor, and council member Freddie Puza on their social media. They do a lot of community events as well. And then showing up to council meetings is really important. The next step for this is it has to come back for a second reading. And that, could be at the next council meeting, which I believe might be on February 13th. But it's to be determined. You kind of have to pay attention to, what agenda items are coming out. There are a lot of advocacy organizations that you mentioned that were part of the rally and who are working really hard on this too. Puma, Palms Unhoused Mutual Aid is doing boots on the ground work and some great organizing to help with compassion. Our houseless neighbors, Culver City for More Homes, the Culver City Action Network, all of these organizations are doing, supporting them, staying tuned to what they're saying. That's how we can all step up and reverse the tide of the harm that's being perpetuated.
Thank you, Megan. Anything you want to add there, Alex?
I think that's a great set of call to action. I guess the only thing I'd go the other direction up to 30,000 feet and just say, because this is not about drugs, and even if it were, these aren't solutions. Like none of these solve drugs. Nobody solved drugs anywhere. Same with mental illness. Because it's about rent and the increase of rent, the unmitigated increase in rent. This problem is going to get worse. It is regionally. And I love Mayor Bass. I believe that that her work is good. It's important to distinguish that LA's emergency declaration from our own. Mm-hmm. Theirs gave the mayor streamlining authority, more power, more resources. A comparable emergency declaration would have given our city manager a large budget and a blank check from council to get people housed. It's a really stark difference. Our emergency declaration has been wrapped, once again, in this doublespeak in Karen Bass's declaration, but the two couldn't be more different. Yeah. All that said, I appreciate her work, and it's good. She's focused. It's great. This is it is a flow, not a stock. And there's a tidal wave of evictions coming. There is a nonstop process of people falling out of housing because they're paying more than 50% of their income in rent. They're living, 6 families to a 2-bedroom in Westlake. They are, job loss, rent increase, just bad break. That's what happens. That's how this happens. Yes, mental illness and drugs are precipitating factors for homelessness, but it's a game of musical chairs. And when there are not enough chairs, the person who loses is someone with a disability, right? Because there's plenty of West Virginians who are housed and are on drugs. There are plenty of mental ill people everywhere on earth who are having real difficulties maintaining their grip and functioning, holding down a job, but they're housed. It is solely rent. And so until we make to turn the corner and really invest and also just let people build some market rate apartments, this is going to get worse. And people need advocates for the unhoused. need to, the education is, sorry not to be ranting, but the education is so important, because if we don't educate people on the root causes of homelessness, the bloodthirst is going to get larger and more persuasive.
So really,
also, just
go ahead, Megan.
so support raising the minimum wage. It was just atrocious that the first act of the new council was to rescind raising the wage for healthcare workers who have been saving our lives and who have housing insecurity. So, all of these come together, and, from the conservative side, everything is coalescing to put people in more precarious positions for the profit of big companies. But we need to support our progressives in order to turn the tide and serve people.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Alex. I think I speak for a lot of people that just when we say we're extremely grateful to have had you in, as city leaders, and to continue to watch you lead us from a policy perspective. Thank you for all of your work and all of your advocacy, and continue to speak up, and please don't go anywhere. We need you. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you to everybody who's watching. Like Megan and Alex said, please follow these organizations and these leaders doing this amazing work, including Alex and Megan. You saw their socials up just a few minutes ago, but also Culver City Action Network, Culver City for More Homes, Puma, and then of course our Vice Mayor Yasmin Amani McMorrin and Council Member Freddie Puza. Those are, the people and organizations really at the heart of this. Nancy Barba, also the one of the organizers of Culver City for More Homes. Follow those people and make sure that you stay plugged in and stay active and stay mad. This is a really long fight, and we have many, many more of these conversations to have. So stay with us, and thank you so much for being here and spending your evening with us. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for your work, Bubba.
Thanks.